Well, she was born in France in 1873. And then in 1888, at the tender age of 15, she joined the Order of the Carmelites and entered their convent in Lisieux, Normandy. Her years at Carmel were quiet and uneventful. She dutifully participated in the life of the community, but without outward distinction. In 1896, she woke up on the morning of Good Friday to find her mouth full of blood. And then in 1897, after a prolonged and painful 18-month battle with tuberculosis, Therese Martin died. She was 24 years old. By all outward appearances, her life had been unremarkable. In fact, so ordinary was the life of Therese Martin that one of the Carmelite sisters who had lived with her for many years in the convent wondered aloud whether they were going to have anything to say about her at her funeral. Now, I don't know if we have record of what was said at her funeral, but in 1914, Pope Pius X called her the greatest saint of modern times. And then in 1925, just 28 years after her death, Therese was canonized. She became a saint in the Roman Catholic Church. And as if that were not enough, in 1997, 100 years after her death, Pope John Paul II named St. Therese a doctor of the Church, joining the likes of St. Augustine, St. Thomas Aquinas, St. Teresa of Avila, and St. Catherine of Siena, among others. So what happened? How did this young French girl become one of the most popular saints in Roman Catholicism? Popular among both lay people and clergy. How did the little flower, as she is often called, become so influential? Influential on people like Thomas Merton and Dorothy Day, who often quote her. So influential that Mother Teresa of Calcutta, who we now know as Saint Teresa of Calcutta, when she became a novice in her order, took the name of Saint Therese of Lisieux. Well, it all goes back to her spiritual memoir, which is entitled Story of a Soul. It was published a year after her death, and much to the surprise of her Carmelite sisters, it gained wide notoriety. Now, I don't intend to offer an explanation as to why it became so popular. In part, its appeal isn't quite obvious. In fact, people who have read Story of a Soul have reacted to it very differently. Some people really like it, and some people really don't. Some people grow to love it, and some people just don't get what the fuss is all about. And so even today, there's some mystery as to its popularity over the past 120 years. But I bring it up because it relates to last week's sermon. Last week, following the lead of Richard Beck, I made a suggestion that if we want to follow Jesus and follow the two great commandments, if we want to love God with everything that we are, everything that we have, and everything that we hope to be, and if we want to love our neighbors as ourselves, then we might need to give love a rest. According to Beck, love has become an overused word. And so we've lost touch with love. And perhaps we've become overwhelmed by love. At least overwhelmed by our understanding of what love is supposed to look like. And so in order for us to catch a breath, we might need to give love a breather. Because according to Beck, take that back, we might need to take love out of the game. And in its place, put kindness. Because according to Beck, kindness is the tutor of love. Kindness is love on training wheels. And so instead of trying to love the whole world all at once, what if we started smaller? What if we focused on just one part of the world? What if we committed ourselves to loving locally by practicing kindness, just for a while, just to see how far kindness gets us. Well, that's essentially what Therese of Lisieux did, and what she wrote about in the final months of her life. You see, when she entered the convent at the precocious age of 15, and she was precocious, her sisters had been in the convent, but you were only allowed to go to convent if you were 16 years old. So she appealed to the Pope, and the Pope granted her permission to enter the convent early. And so she had big plans. She was going to do great things for Jesus. She didn't know exactly what things she would do, but she knew they were going to be great because she had so much love for him. But to her dismay, she soon discovered that it's very hard to do big, great things for Jesus when you're stuck in a convent. Monastic life is very structured, very monotonous. It's exceedingly mundane and ordinary. And so in some respects, Therese's life in the convent wasn't so much different from our own lives, where each day looks pretty much like every other day, with its schedules, its routines, and its responsibilities. And so, like many of us, Therese found her spiritual aspirations trapped by the smallness of her life. Her faith seemed trivial, domesticated, and so she became restless. She began to feel guilty because all of her big plans to follow Jesus in a big way were coming to naught. And so she began to pray. She fell on her knees and she begged Jesus, "Show me what I'm supposed to be doing." Well, I don't know how long Therese was in her spiritual crisis, but one day she had a revelation. She was reading through 1 Corinthians 12, that famous passage where Paul describes the church as the body of Christ. A body, says Paul, has many different members performing many different functions, all of which are important. A body has a mouth, and Therese thought of preachers and teachers. A body has feet, and Therese thought of missionaries and apostles. A body has hands, which are priests and pastors. And as she meditated on this image, she kept trying to figure out what part was she. What part of the body was she? And none of the parts seemed to fit her life. She wasn't a mouth. She wasn't hands or feet. So what was she? Well, with this in mind, she turned the page, as it were, and began reading 1 Corinthians 13, the famous chapter on love, where Paul argues that love is greater than all of the spiritual gifts combined. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love doesn't insist on its own way. And now faith, hope, and love abide, these three. And the greatest of these is love. And suddenly, in a flash of insight, Therese knew what her spiritual vocation was. She knew exactly what part of the body God had called her to be. She would be the heart. She would be love. And so she writes, "I finally had rest. Charity gave me the key to my vocation. I understood that if the church had a body composed of different members, the most necessary and most noble of all could not be lacking to it. And so I understood that the church had a heart, and that this heart was burning with love. And then in the excess of my delirious joy, I cried out, 'Oh Jesus, my love, my vocation, at last I have found it. My vocation is love. Yes, I found my place in the church. I shall be love, and thus I shall be everything.'" Now, at first glance, this rapturous new insight seems really, really big. I mean, it's no small thing to declare yourself the heart of the church. It's no small thing to set out to be love. But what's so fascinating about St. Therese and what has inspired so many is how she actually goes about her work of being loved. I mean, you would think that such a grand vision would be carried out on a very grand, great scale. But it wasn't. As Therese explored her new vocation, she came to see that Jesus wasn't calling her to do great things, but to do all things, even very little things, with great love. And this became known as the little way, this doing little things with great love. Now, in the last section of her memoirs, Therese tells lots of stories of how she put her little way into practice. She writes about the various experiments that she carried out in what she called the science of love. And so there's this one famous example of how she practiced the little way. Living in a convent, Therese made an observation that we could all make in our own lives. She noticed that some sisters were more popular than other sisters. She writes, "I've noticed, and this is very natural, that the most saintly sisters are the most loved. We seek their company, we render them services without their asking. These sisters, though they don't need it, find themselves surrounded by everybody's affections. But she also noticed that there were other sisters whom no one sought out. Sisters that everyone avoided, either because they were annoying, socially awkward, or because they were just plain hard to get along with. And she saw these sisters as having wounded souls, as having personalities and emotions in need of care. Just like the wounds of the man who had been beaten and left for dead in Jesus' parable of the Good Samaritan. And so Therese makes a conscious decision to seek out those sisters who went unnoticed, who were intentionally avoided. And what did she do when she found these sisters, when she sought them out? Often she simply offered them a warm smile or a kind word. Now that doesn't sound like a lot. But as she said, such small kindnesses were often enough to make a sad soul bloom. Now I hasten to add that Therese wasn't simply engaging in spontaneous, random acts of kindness. She was engaging in intentional, premeditated acts of kindness. She didn't simply offer a warm smile to a stranger or speak a kind word to people that she happened to run into. She wasn't operating on social autopilot. Instead, Therese chose to swim upstream against the currents of her natural affections. She deliberately and willfully sought out people to extend kindness to, especially persons that she wasn't automatically drawn to. And so in this respect, the little way isn't simply about showing kindness. It's about cultivating an intentional practice of kindness, developing a habit of kindness. The little way is a spiritual discipline of welcome and hospitality, which according to Beck, has the power to widen the circles of our affections by expanding the territory of our kindness and including more and more people in that territory. The beauty and the power of the little way is that it can be practiced by anyone everywhere. It's not for saints with a big S. The little way doesn't require extraordinary people living in extraordinary situations. The little way is not necessarily easy, but it is perfectly suited for ordinary saints leading ordinary lives. For each of us knows of people that we could intentionally seek out. People at work, people at church, people at places that we visit frequently. People who would greatly benefit from the love of Jesus made real through simple acts of intentional kindness. A warm smile, a kind word, or maybe just sitting and listening for 5 minutes. It's All Saints Sunday, and we're all saints. And St. Teresa of Lisieux has left us a way to be saints in a very practical, ordinary